The gangster poured the wine on the ground and threw a rag to the man in front of him. Then he told the man to kneel on the ground and dry the wine. The man glanced at his elderly father. He could only do as told. Then there were more excessive demands from the gangster. The man obeyed in silence. The gangster was even more encouraged. He thought he found the right man to pick on. The man wanted to go, but he was stopped and smashed to the door. The gangster still refused to stop, taking him outside and humiliating him in front of all the residents of the town. The man didn't fight back from beginning to end. The residents of the town watched in amusement. What happened to the beaten man? John was a notorious bounty hunter. There were 388 wicked men being caught by him. In Weston, if John was second, no one dared to be first. A few days ago, he returned to the small town where he grew up. The barking of the dog led his father out of the house. But his father's smile gradually froze. Returning home after 10 years, his father just said, "Your mother's gone." John felt guilty and fell into grief. He had failed to fulfill the responsibility of a son. After a long silence, Rev noticed that on his son's waist, there was something missing. He asked, "Where's your gun?" John replied, "I may not touch it for the rest of my life." Rev hummed, "One's nature can't be changed." Why did Rev say that? It was because he heard what John had done in the past 10 years. He had become a demon, just like a killing machine, constantly taking away people's life. His reputation had spread all over the town. In the church, after everyone left, John sat alone and kept praying. Rev came in and sat next to him. John talked about his situation in recent years. One day, after the task was completed, he came to a bar for a drink. A group of gangsters was asking for trouble. He killed them without saying a word. He could have left, but an arrogant like him didn't do that. He publicly humiliated and challenged the gangsters. As expected, they called the whole gang out to revenge. As a result, they were all killed by John. In the gunfight, John's bullets flew all over the sky, shooting all the enemies. But a bullet missed his target and shot an innocent little boy. The accident made John feel guilty. He thought that he should pay for it. As he spoke, he trembled and burst into tears. The next day, when John and his father went to the town to buy groceries, the residents who came out of the shop glanced at him one after another. Some people looked in awe. Some people looked at him with fear. They were afraid that he would destroy the town. His father told him to get the wine. It was here that he met Frank, the little bastard who was looking for trouble. As soon as Frank saw John without a gun, he came over and picked on him. With his record of hitting 4 people, he just wanted to ask John if he had heard of his reputation. John was helpless, but Frank was still mocking John. Fortunately, Frank's boss, Bob, came forward to stop them. Frank left bitterly, but the image of John being helpless had been fixed in Frank's mind. Frank and his gang were invited by Bob to the pub. Because they wanted to build a railway in the town, they needed to occupy residents' farms to buy land at a low price. Frank and others would use some dirty tricks to achieve it. Bob didn't expect John to come back. He was afraid that John would meddle in the matter. He was a top bounty hunter, but broke into tears because he killed a little boy by mistake. So he decided to put down his gun from then on. Being bullied by gangsters, but he never fought back. To buy the land of the residents at a low price, the gang did all kinds of evil things. First, they beat Daniel, who refused to sell his land in the street. Frank told John to beg him for mercy. He could only lay down his dignity and forced himself to say those words. But the next day, Bob took Frank and his gang to Daniel's house. Daniel pointed a shotgun at him, making a pledge to defend the territory to the death. Though Bob was also a top hunter, he was still a little soft-hearted. He first convinced the residents with words, telling them to get away with money, finding a peaceful town to spend the rest of their life. His words seemed to have an effect. Daniel began to hesitate, but not waiting for Daniel to give an answer, a grumpy gangster in the back shot Daniel directly. Bob couldn't contain his anger, turning around and shooting the gangster. Frank and others just snickered. "Now I dare you to disobey." Daniel's death scared the people in the town. They wanted to find someone who could help them, so the residents discussed whether to gather together and asked for a strong man to protect them. After discussing, they thought John was the best choice. To this proposal, Rev was firmly opposed. "Why don't you let your son do the right thing?" Besides, James, the boss behind this crime, still hadn't bought their land yet. They knew that he wanted their land at a low price. Some ferocious methods must be used. James' request was rejected by Bob. Because Bob was not a killing machine, taking money from these poor residents, he couldn't do it. John cultivated every day in his farmland. He would build a garden for his mother. Rev mocked John on one side. "Why didn't you do it when your mother was alive? You sure don't regret it until she's gone." John hesitated, saying there was a thing that had pressed in his heart for more than 10 years. John and his brother were playing by the river when he was 4. Both of them accidentally fell into the lake. When Rev saw that it was John who survived, he expressed his disappointment in his eyes. Rev tried to argue that he didn't regret it was him. Because Bob refused the unreasonable request of James, Frank could only try to reason with Bob. But unexpectedly, there was an ambush. Frank and others were shot and defeated. For revenge, Frank ambushed in the distance the next day. A shot ended the man on the spot. James came out again, finding another farmer in the town. He was threatening and luring the farmer to sell the land to him at a low price. The death of the first farmer made the man hesitate. He finally compromised on the premise of discussing with his wife. A few days later, James took his men to the farmer's house to take his land. At this time, his pregnant wife was still clueless. She had no idea what happened. She immediately drove to John and asked John for help. John refused her. Rev heard it from afar and came to James in the evening. Because they were friends, Rev thought he could convince him to give the land back to the farmer. But James also lured him with money, having no intention to give back the land he took. Rev had to leave reluctantly, but he was seen by Frank and his gang. They beat Rev to the ground. A knife came in the back. Rev was watched by gangsters. They beat him and even stabbed him with a knife. John came at a gallop on horseback only to see his father lied on the ground. Fortunately, his injury was not fatal. John stayed in the hospital all night. Rev woke up and grabbed his son's hand. Looking at the fire of revenge in John's eyes, he told John not to be impulsive. Though he detested those gangsters as well, he was also afraid of John's short temper. Was revenge worth it at all? There was nothing more than John's determination now. It was time to do justice for the town residents. After saying goodbye to his father, he rode home in a hurry, taking out his shotgun, dressing neatly, checking ammunition, putting on his hat. But a handful of bullets was not enough. He came to buy more weapons. The shop owner seemed to know that John was going to take revenge. He gave the strongest weapon to John. At this time, the farmer's family was preparing to move away. John stepped out of the door. A strong intention spread around. The town residents stopped one after another. They seemed to feel his anger from inside out. With everyone watching, he walked slowly to Frank's bar, entering the door. Who did it to my father last night? At this time, Frank thought that John was still that weak man that once he harassed. One of Frank's fellow men, who stabbed Rev, was still arrogant. Rev's son. Other gangsters were instantly aware. They didn't expect someone like John could act so decisively. John raised 2 guns. Leave if you don't want to die. Frank threatened everyone not to go, but John's reputation was to stand out. They left one by one. Only Frank and some of his gang left in the bar. One of them was ready to draw a gun, but he was killed by John instead. A burst of the gunshot was heard. There were only 3 of Frank's fellow men left. The atmosphere was momentarily quiet. One man came forward and tried to check John's condition. Unexpectedly, he was shot dead by the John hiding behind. There were only 2 gangsters left. John took off his coat and threw it out, swindling a gangster and hit him successfully. Now only Frank was left. They walked out slowly. I could see that Frank was scared to the extreme. John was calm. A burst of counterfire came from John. Frank fled upstairs, playing hide and seek with John. John suddenly appeared and shot accurately to end Frank. John went out of the bar. Dave was waiting for him outside of the bar. Both of them were top bounty hunters. Bob hired him with a huge amount of money. Even if heroes cherished each other, he couldn't let him go just like that. Besides, Bob signed a contract with James. John despised it, coming to the second floor of the bar and shooting James. They looked at each other and smiled. Since then, the sinister Western world had gotten a good place to stay. Finally, John came to his father. He said frankly that his story today would be spread soon. After that, more people would try to kill him and become famous. So John chose to leave. He told his father that the planting of his mother's garden was completed. At the right time, he would go home to visit them. Then he disappeared into the unknown under the awe of the town residents. In the coming decades, though he wasn't there anymore, his legend was everywhere in Western. The movie's title is Forsaken. Some abandoned things could be retrieved, but some could not. The biggest problem of John was not a vicious stream. It was the guilt at the bottom of his heart to his brother, to his parents, to the child who was killed by mistake, to himself. The moment he stepped into the church, or when he held his father and cried bitterly, or when he sowed the seeds into the newly reclaimed garden for his mother, he had recovered the most precious thing he abandoned. That was himself. I'm Harry. I'll see you next time.